The subway car lurched forward into Monday morning darkness, metal wheels shrieking against rails that had carried millions of souls through tunnels beneath Manhattan. Marcus Cole stood near the center pole, one hand wrapped around cold steel, the other holding his daughter's small fingers. 7-year-old Lily pressed against his leg as strangers swayed in the rhythm of movement and stops briefcases and backpacks, forming a forest of indifference around them. The train slowed, brakes hissed, doors parted to admit another wave of humanity at 34th Street. She stepped aboard wearing a gray coat that had cost more than Marcus earned in 2 months, though nothing about it announced wealth to the untrained eye. The fabric was expensive in its simplicity, cut with precision that most riders would never notice. Her shoes were leather but unadorned. Her bag was black and functional. But there was something in the way she carried herself, a quality Marcus had learned to recognize after 3 years of being invisible in buildings where powerful people worked. She was tired. That much was obvious from the way her shoulders curved slightly forward from the tightness around her eyes. Sharp intelligence lived in those eyes, but exhaustion had dulled their edge this morning. No one offered her a seat. The young man in the Knicks jersey kept his earbuds in and his gaze fixed on his phone. The woman in the business suit pretended to read her tablet. Two teenagers argued about something involving a video game, oblivious to everyone beyond their own drama. Marcus looked at Lily, who was watching the new passenger with the frank curiosity children possess before the world teaches them to look away. Then he looked back at the woman, saw the way she gripped the overhead rail with hands that belonged to someone unused to standing for long periods, and made his decision without thinking about it too hard. He guided Lily up with a gentle touch on her shoulder. The motion was smooth, practiced, the kind of thing he did without announcement or ceremony. The woman paused mid-reach for the pole. Their eyes met for perhaps 2 seconds. She saw something in his face, he saw something in hers, and in that brief exchange lived an entire conversation about dignity and need, and the small transactions that made living among strangers bearable. She sat down. Her mouth opened as if to speak, but Marcus had already turned his attention to positioning himself between Lily and the press of bodies near the doors. The train rolled forward. The moment dissolved into the ordinary chaos of morning commute. The woman watched them for the next 3 stops. Marcus felt her gaze occasionally but did not acknowledge it. He bent down when Lily tugged his sleeve, listened as she whispered something about a girl at school who had brought a hamster for show and tell, nodded and smiled at her excitement. When the train lurched around a curve, he steadied his daughter with one hand and kept his other on the pole, a human anchor in the swaying crowd. At 51st Street, Lily pointed to something outside the window as they emerged briefly into daylight before plunging back into tunnel darkness. Marcus crouched to her level, following her finger, explaining what she was seeing. His flannel shirt pulled tight across his shoulders, worn fabric straining at seams. He had reinforced himself with thread that did not quite match. The woman in the gray coat noticed the patch on his canvas jacket, nearly invisible, but present if you knew to look. She noticed the careful way he had combed his daughter's hair into a ponytail that was almost straight, almost professional, the work of someone who had taught himself a skill that did not come naturally. She noticed the purple backpack decorated with cartoon dinosaurs, clean, but faded, the kind of thing you found at discount stores or received as a hand-me-down. And she noticed the way the child looked at her father with a trust so complete it seemed to create a protective circle around them both, a space where the subway's chaos could not fully penetrate. Victoria Ashford had not taken the subway in 15 years. This morning, her driver had called in sick with what sounded like genuine flu, not the invented kind that preceded a long weekend. Her backup driver was stuck in traffic on the Triborough Bridge, dealing with an overturned truck that had closed 2 lanes. She had a board meeting at 9:30 that would determine the fate of a $300 million acquisition, and the traffic cameras showed nothing but red lines across every route her car could take. So she had done what she used to do in her 20s before the company exploded into something that required security details and advanced planning. She had walked 6 blocks to the nearest station, found the Metro card she kept in her wallet for emergencies that never came, and swiped through the turnstile like any other anonymous rider. The platform had been crowded with people who had somewhere to be and no time to get there. Victoria had forgotten how exhausting it was to be invisible, to stand among strangers who did not recognize her face from business magazines or shareholder presentations. In her world, people moved when she entered a room. Assistants anticipated her needs 3 steps ahead. Security cleared paths through crowds before she reached them. Conference rooms fell silent when she spoke. But here underground, she was just another tired face in a gray coat. No one knew that her signature could create or destroy thousands of jobs with a stroke. No one knew that she had spent the previous evening reviewing a proposal to shut down 3 manufacturing facilities in Ohio, consolidating operations to improve margins by 8%. No one knew that those margins translated to families without paychecks, towns without tax bases, lives rearranged around spreadsheet cells. And no one had offered her a seat. Until him. She studied the man, now memorizing details without quite knowing why. Early 30s, though, life had carved lines around his eyes that added years. Handsome in an unpolished way, with a jaw that needed a razor and hair that needed a better cut than whatever discount place had last touched it. His hands were rough nails, short and clean, but fingers marked with small scars and calluses from work that required tools. He did not look poor exactly. He looked like someone who had learned to survive on less than he once had, someone who knew the price of everything because budgets were measured in dollars, not thousands. His jeans were faded at the knees from wear, not fashion. His watch was digital and functional. His wedding ring was gone, but Victoria could see the pale line where it had been a ghost of gold on weathered skin. The train slowed for Lexington Avenue. More passengers pushed toward the doors. The man placed both hands on his daughter's shoulders, steadying her as bodies pressed from all sides. She looked up at him with absolute certainty that he would keep her safe, and Victoria felt something twist in her chest, something she had not felt in so long she almost did not recognize it. Envy. Not for his circumstances, obviously. Not for the worn jacket or the careful budgeting or the life that required subway rides instead of town cars. But for that look. That unconditional trust from a small person who believed her father could protect her from anything. Victoria had never had children. The window for that had closed while she was busy building an empire, making herself indispensable to boards and shareholders and analysts who measured her worth in quarterly returns. She had told herself it was a choice, that she had chosen ambition over domesticity, strategy over sentiment. But sitting in this borrowed seat, watching a stranger's daughter gaze up at him like he hung the moon, Victoria wondered if she had chosen anything at all, or if she had simply let one thing crowd out another until the space for softness had disappeared entirely. The train reached her stop. She stood adjusting her bag and glanced back one final time before stepping onto the platform. The man was helping his daughter navigate through the crowd, his hand gentle on her back, guiding without pushing. He did not look for acknowledgement. He did not check to see if the woman whose seat he had given up was watching. He just moved through the world doing what he did, which apparently included giving things away to strangers. Victoria climbed the stairs to street level, emerged into morning sunlight that felt too bright after the tunnel's fluorescent dimness, and stood for a moment watching the subway entrance. She saw them come up a different exit, 2 figures among hundreds, the man's hand still on his daughter's shoulder as they navigated the sidewalk traffic. They turned west and disappeared into the city that would never know their names. Victoria checked her watch. She had 12 minutes to reach her building, which was plenty of time. But she stood there for 30 seconds longer, watching the space where they had been trying to understand why a stranger giving up a subway seat had lodged itself in her mind like a splinter. Then she walked toward her building, toward the meeting that would restructure an entire division, toward decisions that would be measured in millions, while a man who counted dollars made his way to whatever job required those calloused hands. Marcus Cole had been a project manager once before Emily died. Not an impressive one by most standards. No corner office, no executive title, no stock options or performance bonuses that made the years of graduate school feel worthwhile. But he had been steady, reliable, the kind of employee who showed up early and stayed late, who never missed a deadline, who quietly kept projects running while others took credit during presentations. He had been good at his job. Not brilliant, not indispensable, but competent in a way that should have earned him a career, a trajectory, a future that looked like the one he had planned when he and Emily had sat in their first apartment making spreadsheets about mortgages and retirement accounts. That was before Route 9 on a Tuesday evening 3 years ago, before a delivery truck driver who had been awake for 22 hours ran a red light because his dispatcher had set a deadline that did not account for human limitations. Before Emily's sedan crumpled like paper, before the officer came to the door while Marcus was watching Bubble Guppies with Lily, before the words that split his life into before and after. The doctor said she had died on impact. Marcus had asked him to repeat it, needed to hear it again, needed to confirm that she had not suffered, had not called for him, had not spent her last moments knowing she would never see her daughter grow up. The doctor had been patient, had explained about force and velocity in catastrophic injury clinical terms that meant Emily had simply stopped existing between one heartbeat and the next. It should have been a comfort. It was not. The funeral had been crowded with people Marcus barely knew. Colleagues from Emily's law firm, friends from her college years, family members who emerged from corners of her past he had never fully mapped. Everyone had been so sorry, so deeply sorry, their sympathy genuine but useless words washing over him, while he sat in the front pew with Lily in his lap, her small body trembling with confusion about why Mommy was in the box and why everyone kept crying. Emily's parents had sat beside him, her mother weeping with the kind of grief that sounded like rage, her father silent, in gray jaw working like he was chewing glass. They had not approved of Marcus when Emily brought him home 6 years earlier. He was not from their world, not from the country clubs and boarding schools and summer houses that had shaped their daughter's childhood. He had grown up in Pittsburgh, son of a steelworker who drank too much and a mother who cleaned houses to make ends meet. Emily had not cared. She had loved him with a fierce certainty that made him believe he was worth loving, that his ordinary background and modest ambitions were enough. They had built a life together that felt solid, permanent, a foundation that would support decades. 3 years of marriage, one perfect daughter, then a truck driver who could not keep his eyes open. The months after the funeral blurred together in Marcus's memory, a sequence of decisions made while moving through fog. He took bereavement leave from his job, 2 weeks that turned into 4, when he could not imagine returning to the office where people would ask how he was doing, would tilt their heads in sympathy, would make space for his grief, in ways that only highlighted its size. When he did go back, everything felt wrong. The projects that had once engaged him seemed meaningless. The deadlines that had once motivated him felt like arbitrary cruelties invented by people who did not understand that time was not infinite, that lives could end between morning coffee and dinner. He could not travel anymore, could not stay late, could not prioritize deliverables over a 4-year-old who woke up crying for her mother at 2 in the morning. His supervisor had been understanding at first, then patient, then practical. When the promotion Marcus had been working toward for 3 years opened up, they gave it to someone else, someone without complications, someone who could commit fully to the role's demands. Marcus had sat in the meeting where they explained the decision and nodded like it made sense, like he agreed that his daughter's needs made him unsuitable for advancement. He accepted a demotion 6 months later when they restructured his department, took a transfer to a team that worked different hours, slower projects, less visibility. Told himself it was fine that Lily mattered more than any title or salary, that Emily would have supported this choice. But the world did not reward sacrifice. It rewarded presence and ambition and the ability to pretend that work was the most important thing in life. The layoff came 14 months after Emily died. The company was consolidating, eliminating redundancies. Marcus's entire division absorbed into a larger group that did not need his particular skills. They offered him a package 3 months severance and COBRA coverage delivered by HR with practiced sympathy. His supervisor sent an email expressing regret and wishing him well. The colleagues he had worked with for 5 years sent a group card. No one offered him another job. No one made calls on his behalf. He had been competent but not memorable, reliable but not remarkable, and in a corporate world that measured value by how hard you were to replace, Marcus had been easy. He found work as a maintenance technician at an office building in Midtown 3 months later, after his savings had dwindled to the point where he was choosing between Lily's new shoes and his own meals. The pay was enough to cover rent on their 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, enough for groceries from the discount store, and clothes from Goodwill enough for the occasional treat when Lily had been especially good. Not enough for savings, not enough for emergencies, not enough for the life he had planned when Emily was alive and futures felt guaranteed. Emily's parents had offered to help exactly once. They had arrived at his apartment on a Saturday afternoon 6 months after the funeral, bringing their lawyer like they were conducting a business transaction instead of visiting their granddaughter. Marcus had served them tea. He could not afford cookies from a package that was supposed to last the week while their lawyer spread documents across his second-hand coffee table. They were worried about Lily's welfare. They had resources Marcus did not. They only wanted what was best for their granddaughter. The schools in their district were better. Their home had space for a child to grow. They could provide opportunities, advantages, a future that looked like the one Emily had known before she made the mistake of marrying beneath her station. The lawyer never said those exact words, but they hung in the air anyway, unspoken but clear. Marcus had listened politely, had read the documents that outlined custody arrangements and visitation schedules, had seen his daughter's life mapped out in clauses and subclauses that reduced him to a weekend inconvenience. Then he had asked them to leave. Calmly, quietly, with Lily in the next room, playing with the blocks, he had gathered their papers and handed them back, had opened the door and stood beside it until they understood he was serious. Emily's mother had started crying. Her father had turned red jaw, working again. That tell Marcus had learned meant he was furious, but too well-bred to shout. The lawyer had warned about making emotional decisions, about considering the child's best interests, about how courts looked at stability and resources. Marcus had said nothing until they were in the hallway. Then he had spoken the only words that mattered: "Lily is my daughter and she stays with me." They had not tried again. Not with lawyers, at least. But Emily's mother called every Sunday conversations that started with asking about Lily and ended with pointed questions about whether Marcus had enough money, whether the neighborhood was safe, whether he had thought about what would happen if he lost his job. She never quite said she was building a case, but the implication was there a threat wrapped in grandmother's concern. Marcus had stopped answering after the 10th call. Let it go to voicemail, listened to her messages while Lily slept, deleted them without response. He was not giving them ammunition. He was not giving them anything. Lily was all he had. The only piece of Emily that remained in a world that had taken her without warning or mercy. And he would work every dead-end job, live in every cramped apartment, eat every meal of rice and beans before he would let anyone take his daughter away. The morning Victoria sat in his seat, Marcus had been awake since 4:30. The radiator in their apartment had broken again, third time this month, and the landlord was not answering calls. Marcus had fixed it himself with a wrench and electrical tape and a YouTube tutorial watched on his phone, working by the light of his screen while his breath fogged in the cold. By the time Lily woke at 6:30, the apartment was warm. Marcus had made her breakfast: scrambled eggs and toast, the good jam she liked, that cost more than the cheap kind but made her smile. He had combed her hair while she ate, attempting the ponytail. She preferred his rough fingers fumbling with the elastic until it was straight enough to pass inspection. His coffee had gone cold on the counter, forgotten in the rush to get her ready. He drank it anyway, room temperature caffeine that did nothing to address the exhaustion that had become his baseline state. Then they had walked to the subway together, Lily's small hand in his, her purple backpack bouncing against her shoulders as she told him about the book her teacher had read yesterday, something involving a dragon and a princess and a plot twist, Lily explained, with the seriousness of a literary critic. He had given his seat away without thinking about it. It was what Emily would have done. It was what he did now in her absence, trying to be the kind of person she had believed he was. Later that morning, Victoria Ashford sat in her corner office on the 47th floor, watching the city spread out below like a circuit board of glass and steel. The board meeting had gone well. The acquisition was approved, $300 million committed with her signature, a company absorbed into her empire with the stroke of a pen. Her CFO had praised her instincts. The analysts were already adjusting their models, predicting strong returns. Victoria felt nothing. She should have felt triumph. This deal had taken 6 months to structure, countless hours of negotiation, strategic concessions that had seemed painful at the time, but now looked brilliant. It would add 12% to their market share, eliminate a competitor, position them perfectly for the next phase of expansion. But sitting at her desk with the paperwork in front of her, all Victoria could think about was the man on the subway, the way he had stood up without hesitation, without calculation, without expecting anything in return. She tried to remember the last time she had given something away without strategic purpose. Could not. Her entire life was strategy now. Every decision measured against outcomes, every relationship evaluated for utility, every generous gesture calculated to produce returns. She donated to charities that enhanced her reputation. She mentored young executives who might be useful later. She attended galas and benefits because networking happened. Their deals were made over champagne and canapes, alliances formed in conversations that looked social but were fundamentally transactional. When had that happened? When had she become someone who could not give up a subway seat without wondering what it would cost her? Victoria stood and walked to the window, pressed her forehead against glass that was probably cold, but felt nothing through the climate control that kept this office at exactly 71 degrees year-round. 47 floors below, people were living lives she no longer understood, worrying about things that had not concerned her in decades. Rent and groceries and whether their cars would start. The small urgencies that filled days when you did not have assistants to handle them. She thought about her father who had worked at a factory in Ohio for 32 years before arthritis forced him into early retirement. He had mowed their elderly neighbor's lawn every Sunday without being asked, without expecting payment, because Mrs. Henderson was 86 and could not afford a lawn service. Victoria had been embarrassed by that when she was a teenager, had thought her father was being taken advantage of, had not understood why he wasted his time on tasks that produced nothing. You help people because it is right, he had told her once, not because it pays. She had believed that when she started her company, had built it on the principle that good products and fair treatment would be rewarded. But somewhere in the climb from startup to corporation, the principle had gotten lost, buried under pressure from investors and boards in the relentless demand for growth that justified every compromise. Now she ran an empire that employed 12,000 people across 3 continents, made decisions that affected lives she would never see, families she would never meet, futures she would never know. And she had stopped asking whether those decisions were kind. She only asked whether they were efficient. The man on the subway had reminded her of something she had spent 30 years trying to forget. That power was not just about what you could take, it was about what you chose to give. Victoria pressed the intercom button without quite knowing why. "Cancel my afternoon." Her assistant's voice came back carefully neutral, trained to respond to unusual requests without question. "The interviews, ma'am, and the calls with London, reschedule them all." "Should I tell them you are unwell?" Victoria paused, considering the lie that would make this easier. "Tell them I am thinking." She released the button before her assistant could respond, sat back down at her desk and stared at the acquisition paperwork that should have been the most important thing in her day. But all she could see was a man standing in a subway car, one hand on his daughter's shoulder, giving up something small because a stranger might need it. Lily asked the question 3 blocks from their subway exit, her voice clear in the morning cold that made their breath visible. "Daddy, why do you always give your seat away?" Marcus slowed his pace to match hers, sneakers scuffing against sidewalk that needed repair. He had not realized she noticed things like that, the small surrenders he made every day, without thinking. He had underestimated her, the way parents always did, forgetting that children were watching, even when they seemed absorbed in their own worlds. Because some people carry more than they show. Lily considered this for half a block, her forehead creased in concentration beneath the hood she had pulled up against the wind. Marcus watched her process the idea, saw her working through it the way she worked through math problems at school, testing possibilities. Like invisible backpacks, Marcus smiled despite his exhaustion, despite the cold, despite everything. Something like that. How do you know who has one? You do not always know. That is the point. You just try to help when you can and hope it lands where it is needed. Lily nodded slowly, accepting this as truth the way she accepted most things her father told her. Then her voice shifted, became smaller, and Marcus knew what was coming before she spoke. "Mom used to do that too. Give things away, I mean." Marcus felt the familiar ache behind his ribs, the one that never fully went away, just dimmed to something manageable until moments like this brought it back sharp and fresh. "Yes, she did. I remember." Lily's hand tightened around his. "She gave her umbrella to that lady outside the grocery store, the one who was crying." Marcus remembered. It had been raining hard, the kind of storm that turned streets into rivers and made umbrellas useless at keeping anything dry. Emily had been running into the store for milk, had spotted a woman standing under the awning, sobbing into her phone, mascara running down her face in black streaks. Emily had walked over without hesitation, handed over their only umbrella, and come back soaking wet. When Marcus asked why, she had just shrugged, water dripping from her hair onto their kitchen floor. She needed it more than we did. That was Emily. Always giving, always seeing people and others walk past, always believing that small kindnesses mattered even when they cost something. "Your mom believed that everyone deserves a little grace," Marcus said now, steering Lily around a puddle left from last night's rain. "Even strangers." especially strangers. What as Grace Marcus felt the weight of the question, the way simple words from children could carry the force of philosophy. It is giving someone something good when they have not earned it, when they cannot pay you back, just because you want them to have it. They reached the school gates. Other parents were arriving now. Expensive cars pulling up to the curb, SUVs with heated seats and premium sound systems. Marcus knelt to zip Lily's jacket higher against the wind that was picking up cold air that promised snow later in the week. Have a good day, sweetheart. I will pick you up at 3. Lily hugged him quick and fierce, her backpack pressing between them. I love you, Daddy. I love you too. More than all the stars. He had said that every day since Emily died needed her to hear it, needed to make sure she knew. Because the world was full of trucks that ran red lights of moments that could steal everything without warning, and he would not let her go one day without knowing she was loved. Lily ran toward the entrance where her teacher was waiting. Marcus watched until she disappeared inside, then turned back toward the subway, toward another day of fixing pipes and replacing light bulbs in an office building where no one knew his name. But something felt different this morning. Lighter, maybe. He had given a stranger his seat. His daughter had noticed. And in noticing, she had reminded him why he did it. Not for reward, not for recognition, but because Emily had believed he was capable of being good, and he was trying to live up to that belief even in her absence. 20 blocks south and 47 floors up. Victoria was thinking about the same moment, though she had not heard the conversation, could not have known what the child had asked or what the father had answered. She had not been able to concentrate all morning. The acquisition paperwork sat unsigned on her desk. Margins, perfect terms, favorable, everything exactly as it should be. Her assistant had stopped by twice asking if she was feeling well, concerned by the unusual stillness, the lack of rapid-fire decisions that usually characterize Victoria's mornings. Victoria stood at her window again, watching the grid of streets below, trying to calculate which neighborhood the man might live in based on where he had boarded the train. Queens, probably. Somewhere the rents were cheaper, the buildings older, the distance from Manhattan measured in more than miles. She knew nothing about his life, his name, his job, his story. He was just a stranger who had given up a seat 2 seconds of intersection that should have meant nothing. But his words echoed in her mind, even though she had not heard them clearly, had only seen the shape of them on his lips as he bent to speak to his daughter. Some people carry more than they show. Such a simple idea, such ordinary kindness. But Victoria had not received ordinary kindness in so long, she had forgotten what it felt like. In her world, people helped each other for reasons. They made introductions because they wanted connections. They offered advice because they wanted influence. They showed generosity because they wanted leverage. Everything was a calculation, a strategy, a move in an endless game where the object was accumulation and the cost was measured in what you gave up to get it. But that man had given up his seat for no reason at all. He had not known who she was. He had not expected anything in return. He had simply seen someone who might need to sit down, and he had stood up. Victoria tried to remember the last time someone had done something for her without wanting something back. The mental search came up empty. She thought about her childhood before the company, before the wealth that had insulated her from ordinary human contact. Her mother had been a secretary at a real estate office, typing contracts on an electric typewriter, answering phones with practiced cheer. Her father's hands had been permanently stained with factory grease, fingernails rimmed with black, that no amount of scrubbing could remove. They had lived in a small house in a small town where everyone knew everyone's business, where privacy was a luxury you could not afford. Victoria had hated it growing up, had felt trapped by the smallness, suffocated by the limitations. She had studied harder than everyone else, won scholarships that took her away to a university where no one knew her father worked with his hands, had built a company from nothing because she was determined to never go back. And she had succeeded. Built an empire, made herself rich beyond anything her parents could have imagined, proved that factory workers' daughters could sit in boardrooms with men who had inherited everything. But somewhere in that climb, she had lost the ability to accept help without suspicion, to trust that people's motives could be pure, to believe that kindness was something other than a manipulation tactic. Her father used to say, "You help people because it is right, not because it pays." When had she stopped believing that? When had right and profitable become the same thing in her mind? Victoria turned from the window, sat down at her desk, and did something she had not done in 15 years. She opened a blank document and started writing by hand pen, moving across paper in the cursive her mother had taught her before carpal tunnel had forced early retirement. She wrote about the subway, about the man who had given up his seat, about how strange it felt to be on the receiving end of generosity that expected nothing in return. She wrote about her father mowing Mrs. Henderson's lawn, about how she had thought he was being foolish, wasting time on someone else's problems, about how she had not understood until this moment that giving without expectation was not weakness or waste, but a way of staying human in a world that made it easy to forget. The writing was rough, unpolished, full of crossed-out words and false starts. Victoria had not written anything by hand except signatures, in years had forgotten how different it felt from typing on a keyboard, how the physical act of forming letters forced you to think more carefully about what you meant to say. When she finished 3 pages of reflection that would never be sent anywhere, never be seen by anyone, she sat back and looked at what she had written. Then she did something else she had not done in years. She called her mother. The phone rang 4 times before the familiar voice answered, surprised and cautious, because Victoria never called in the middle of a workday, never disrupted her schedule for personal matters. "Mom, it is me, I know, sweetheart. Is everything all right?" Victoria paused, unsure how to explain. "I took the subway this morning." Her mother's confusion was audible. "Why is something wrong with your car?" "No, traffic was bad. I had a meeting. It seemed faster." That was not the truth, but it was close enough. Her mother waited, sensing there was more. "A man gave me his seat," Victoria said. "He had a daughter with him, maybe 7 or 8. He just stood up and let me sit down." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "That was kind of him. I have been thinking about Dad, about Mrs. Henderson's lawn." Another pause, longer this time. "You used to get so embarrassed," her mother said softly. "Thought we were too generous with people who would not help themselves." "I was wrong." Her mother's breath caught, and Victoria knew she was crying. Could picture her in the kitchen of the house in Ohio, hand pressed to her mouth the way she did when emotions overwhelmed her. "Your father always said you would understand someday," her mother managed. "That you had to make your own way, but eventually you would circle back to what mattered." "How is he?" Victoria asked, meaning his health, meaning the arthritis that had been getting worse, meaning all the things she should have been asking more often. Good days and bad days. "He asks about you. Tell him I am sorry I do not call more. You are busy." "He understands. That is not an excuse." Her mother did not argue, which was answer enough. They talked for 20 more minutes, the longest conversation they had had in months. When Victoria hung up, her assistant was standing in the doorway looking concerned. "The London calls, ma'am. They are asking if we should reschedule for tomorrow." Victoria looked at the acquisition paperwork still unsigned, looked at the 3 handwritten pages on her desk, looked at the window where the city continued its relentless motion 47 floors below. "Yes, tomorrow, and clear my schedule for the rest of the week after Thursday." Her assistant's eyebrows rose fractionally, the only sign of surprise she allowed herself. "All of it, all of it. Should I give a reason?" Victoria thought about that. "Tell them I am remembering something I forgot." 2 weeks later, Victoria found him again. Not intentionally, she told herself. Not because that she had been taking different subway lines at different times, had been riding trains through neighborhoods she never visited with her face turned toward the windows, hoping to catch a glimpse. She found him at a community center in Chelsea, 3 blocks from a development site her company owned. Victoria had come to inspect the property before a scheduled demolition routine due diligence. Nothing unusual. The building was old, structurally unsound, occupying space that would be worth 3 times as much if they tore it down and built residential towers. But on her way back to her car, she passed a glass-walled room on the ground floor, and through the window she saw children gathered in a circle on a carpet that had seen better days. And there, sitting on a low chair with a picture book open in his lap, was the man from the subway. Victoria stopped walking. Her security detail stopped with her 3 men in dark suits, who had been with her so long they anticipated her movements before she made them. They said nothing, just positioned themselves to block her from the street while she stood staring through glass at a scene she had no business watching. He was reading aloud. She could see his mouth moving, see the exaggerated expressions he made for different characters. The children were rapt, leaning forward at one small boy already raising his hand to ask a question, even though the story was not finished. His daughter sat in the front row, the same purple backpack beside her, watching her father with the focused attention of someone who had heard this story 100 times but still loved every word. Victoria watched for longer than she should have, long enough for her security to get nervous, long enough to see the story end and the children applaud, long enough to see the man gather his daughter in his arms and whisper something that made her giggle. He looked different here than he had on the subway, lighter, less tired, as if this room, these children, were the place where he could finally breathe. When the group started to disperse, Victoria made a decision. She dismissed her security, told them to wait by the car, ignored their protests about protocols. Then she walked into the building alone. The community center smelled like old coffee and floor wax. The walls were covered with children's artwork, construction paper, and finger paint announcing birthdays and field trips and upcoming events. A bulletin board near the entrance advertised yoga classes and job training programs, and a food pantry that operated Tuesdays and Thursdays. Victoria found the reading room empty except for the man who was stacking small chairs against the wall, while his daughter helped by carrying picture books to a shelf. They worked together in comfortable silence, a routine they had clearly performed many times. That was beautiful. He turned. Up close, she could see the gray starting at his temples, the lines around his eyes deeper than they had seemed on the train. He looked at her without recognition, which was a relief. She had not wanted him to know who she was, had not wanted that knowledge to change his face the way it changed everyone's faces. Thank you. It is a volunteer thing. Tuesdays and Thursdays when my schedule allows. Victoria nodded, unsure what to say next. She was not good at small talk. Decades of boardrooms had trained it out of her. Your daughter is lovely. He glanced at the girl who was organizing books by size instead of title, creating her own system. She is everything. The words were simple but carried weight, Victoria recognized. This was not a father making pleasant conversation. This was someone stating the organizing principle of his life. What is your name? Victoria asked. Marcus. Marcus Cole. He extended his hand and she shook it. His grip was firm but not aggressive, the handshake of someone who had worked with tools and learned to calibrate strength. I am Victoria. She did not offer her last name. He did not ask. Lily appeared at his side, tugging his sleeve with the persistence of children who would not be ignored. Daddy, can we get hot chocolate? The place on the corner has the good kind. Marcus looked down at her, then back at Victoria. I should go. It was nice to meet you. You too. She watched them leave hand in hand, the girl chattering about something, while her father listened with the total attention that came naturally to some parents and required effort from others. They pushed through the glass doors and disappeared into the afternoon, two ordinary people living an ordinary life. Victoria stood in the empty room surrounded by picture books and small chairs, trying to understand why this encounter felt more significant than the board meeting she had skipped to be here. Marcus Cole was exactly the kind of person she had spent 30 years forgetting existed. Kind without reason, generous without calculation. Walking through the world, doing small good things that would never be measured or rewarded. She walked back to her car, slowly, mind already working through possibilities. A job opening at one of her subsidiaries, a scholarship for the daughter, a check from an anonymous foundation, ways to help that would not reveal who was helping, that would preserve his dignity while improving his circumstances. But even as she planned, something nagged at her. He had not asked for help. He had not complained about his situation. He had not looked at her like someone who wanted to be saved. And she was beginning to realize that saving people who had not asked was not kindness. It was just another kind of control. The thought bothered her all the way back to her office, bothered her through the evening and into the night, bothered her enough that she did something unprecedented. She called her head of human resources at home. I need background on someone. Quietly, no official channels. She gave Marcus Cole's name, described where she had seen him waited, while her HR director pulled strings and made calls and assembled information that should have been private but never was when you had resources. The file arrived by secure email the next morning. Victoria read it in her office with the door closed, learning the shape of a stranger's tragedy. Wife killed in accident 3 years ago. Career derailed afterward. Laid off, took maintenance job. Living in Queens with daughter. In-laws circling, building case for custody based on financial instability. Barely making rent. No savings. No backup plan. The facts were stark, assembled in bullet points that reduced a life to data. But between the lines, Victoria saw something else. Saw a man who had lost everything and chosen his daughter over his career, who had accepted poverty rather than give up the person he loved most. She sat with the file for a long time, longer than any document deserved. Then she made a decision that would change both their lives, though neither of them knew it yet. She would help, but she would do it wrong first, would make the mistakes that privilege made inevitable, would learn the hard way that good intentions without wisdom were just another form of harm. The scholarship committee received an anonymous donation 3 days later, earmarked specifically for existing students who demonstrated financial need. The paperwork was clean, the trail untraceable. Marcus would receive a letter within 2 weeks explaining that his daughter's tuition had been covered for the next 3 years. Victoria told herself it was elegant, efficient, the kind of help that could not be refused because it could not be identified. She felt good about it for exactly 1 week. Then she saw him again at the community center and everything fell apart. Marcus was waiting for her in the lobby this time, standing with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. The reading room was visible through glass behind him, children gathering for the Tuesday session, but he had not gone in. "I know who you are." His voice was calm, but his eyes were hard, and Victoria felt something she had not felt in years. Genuine surprise. Not because he had figured it out, but because she had underestimated him, had assumed that someone in his position would not have the resources or connections to trace an anonymous donation back to its source. The scholarship, Marcus continued. "Lily's tuition. I made some calls, asked some questions. Took a while, but I figured it out." Victoria considered lying. It was her instinct. Deflect, redirect, maintain control. But something in his face stopped her. "I wanted to help. Why?" "Because you gave me your seat on the subway 3 weeks ago." Marcus stared at her, and she could see him trying to process that logic, trying to understand how a subway seat could lead to thousands of dollars in tuition payments. "That is why. Because I gave you a seat on the train. I know it sounds absurd. It sounds like pity," his jaw tightening. "It sounds like you saw some sad single father struggling to hold it together, and you decided to swoop in and make yourself feel good. That is not, I do not need to be saved, Victoria. My daughter does not need a benefactor. We were doing fine." The words hit harder than any boardroom criticism she had ever received, harder than analyst downgrades or shareholder lawsuits, because they were true. She had not asked what he needed. She had not considered whether he wanted help. She had simply decided the way she decided everything from a position of power, with her own judgment as the final authority. "I apologize," Victoria said, and meant it. Marcus was silent for a long moment. Children's laughter drifted from the reading room, muffled by the glass. His daughter was probably in there wondering where he was. "You know what the hardest part of losing Emily was?" His voice was quieter now, but no less intense. "It was not the grief. It was the way people treated me after. Like my life was some kind of tragedy they could feel good about helping with." He looked at her directly, and Victoria saw something she recognized. The exhaustion of being seen as less than you are. "I am not a charity case," Marcus said. "I am a father doing the best he can, and the best thing people can do for me is treat me like I am capable of handling my own life." Victoria nodded slowly. "I understand." "Do you? Because from where I am standing, it looks like you do not know how to interact with people without trying to control them." The accusation landed like a physical blow. Accurate, unavoidable. Victoria Ashford had built an empire on her ability to see problems and fix them. It was her greatest strength, the quality that had taken her from a factory town in Ohio to the 47th floor of a Manhattan tower. But standing in this fluorescent-lit community center, facing a man who wanted nothing from her, she realized it might also be her greatest flaw. "You are right," she said. "I do not know another way. It is how I have survived." Marcus studied her, and some of the hardness in his eyes softened. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something like recognition. "Then maybe you should learn one," he said, "because throwing money at people is not helping. It is just making yourself feel powerful." He turned and walked toward the reading room where his daughter was waiting. At the door, he paused without looking back. "The scholarship stays. Lily earned it, even if you bought it. But we are done here. I do not want to see you again." The door closed behind him. Victoria stood alone in the hallway, surrounded by children's artwork taped to cinder block walls, and felt something she had not felt in decades. Shame. Real earned shame. She had tried to help, and she had made it worse. She had tried to give, and she had only taken his dignity, his agency, his right to face his own challenges on his own terms. It was the most expensive lesson she had ever learned, worth more than a scholarship, worth more than any acquisition or quarterly return. Victoria walked back to her car where her security detail was waiting. They asked no questions, just opened the door and closed it behind her. The driver pulled into traffic and she watched the community center disappear in the side mirror, watched the building where Marcus Cole was reading to children who loved him, living a life that had nothing to do with her money or her power or her need to fix things she did not understand. She had been wrong, completely, utterly wrong. And for the first time in 30 years, Victoria had no idea how to make it right. The realization settled over her like winter fog, cold and inescapable. She had spent 3 decades believing that resources could solve any problem, that money was the universal language, that power meant having the ability to change things. But Marcus had shown her something different. That dignity mattered more than dollars. That agency mattered more than assistance. That sometimes the most helpful thing the powerful could do was nothing at all. Victoria pressed her forehead against the car window, watched the city blur past, and understood that she had just learned something worth far more than any business degree or executive training program had ever taught her. She had learned what it felt like to be rejected by someone who had every reason to accept help, but chose pride instead. And in that rejection, she had caught a glimpse of the person she had become, someone who believed that having resources meant having the right to decide how they should be used. The car carried her back to her building, back to her office, back to the world where she knew the rules and understood the game. But something had changed. Some assumption had cracked. She could not fix this with money, could not strategize her way to forgiveness, could not leverage her position to force a different outcome. For the first time in decades, Victoria Ashford was powerless, and the lesson was just beginning. Victoria did not see Marcus for almost 2 months. She went back to her life, the meetings and acquisitions, an endless machinery of wealth. But something had shifted inside her, a small crack in the foundation she had spent decades building. She found herself questioning decisions she would have made automatically before. When her CFO proposed closing a distribution center in Pennsylvania to consolidate operations, Victoria asked a question that made the entire executive team pause. How many people work there? Her CFO blinked, caught off guard. 247, ma'am. But the cost savings would be what happens to them. Another pause, longer this time. We offer standard severance packages. Some might find positions at the consolidated facility, though relocation assistance would be limited. Victoria studied the spreadsheet in front of her, saw the numbers that made perfect sense from a quarterly earnings perspective, saw the efficiency gains highlighted in green. What happens to the town, ma'am, Pennsylvania? The town where this distribution center operates. What happens to it when we pull out 247 jobs? Her CFO exchanged glances with the head of operations. This was not how these meetings usually went. I imagine it would be difficult for the local economy, he said carefully. But that is not really our concern. Our fiduciary duty is to shareholders. Victoria closed the folder. Table it. Give me alternative proposals that preserve those jobs or create equivalent opportunities in the same region. The room went silent. She could feel her board members' discomfort, could almost hear their thoughts about whether she was losing her edge, going soft, forgetting what business was actually about. She did not care. That afternoon, she walked through her company's headquarters on the 23rd floor, something she had not done in years. She stopped at cubicles and asked people their names, asked what they were working on, asked if they had everything they needed. Her employees stared at her like she had grown a second head, uncomfortable with the attention, unsure what this meant. A young woman in accounting, maybe 25, mentioned that her mother was sick, that she was trying to work from home twice a week to help with appointments. Victoria made a note. The next day, HR announced a new flexible work policy. 3 months parental leave became 6. Remote work options expanded. Employee assistance programs were funded properly instead of existing as line items that looked good in annual reports. Her COO pulled her aside after the announcement. Victoria, the board is concerned. These changes are expensive. They will impact margins. Victoria met his eyes without flinching. Then we find the money somewhere else. Cut executive bonuses if we need to. He stared at her. You are serious. Completely. The board called an emergency meeting. Shareholders were asking questions. Analysts were adjusting their models. Victoria sat at the head of the conference table and listened to concerns about her recent behavior, about changes in strategic direction, about whether she was fit to continue leading the company she had built. She let them talk. Then she spoke. 30 years ago, I started this company because I believed good products and fair treatment would be rewarded. Somewhere along the way, I forgot the second part. I stopped seeing the people behind the revenue projections. I stopped asking whether our decisions were kind, only whether they were profitable. Her board chair, a man who had been with her for 15 years, leaned forward. Victoria, kindness does not pay dividends. You are wrong, she said quietly. It pays something more valuable. It pays in people who stay, who care about their work, who build companies that last beyond quarterly cycles. We have been optimizing for the wrong metrics. If you do not like it, vote me out. But while I am still CEO, we are going to remember that behind every efficiency gain is a human being whose life we are affecting. No one voted. But Victoria could see the calculations happening behind their eyes, the assessments of whether she had truly lost her mind or whether this was some kind of long-term play they did not understand yet. She did not care about that either. That evening, she called her mother again. I think I understand now, about Dad and the lawn. Her mother's voice was warm. What made you realize? Someone told me I do not know how to help people without trying to control them. He was right. She heard her mother's soft intake of breath. That must have been hard to hear. It was, but I needed to hear it. They talked until late. Victoria at her desk with the city lights spread below her mother in the kitchen, where Victoria had grown up. For the first time in years, the conversation felt real instead of obligatory connection, instead of duty. Meanwhile, 20 miles away in Queens, Marcus was fighting a battle Victoria knew nothing about. The letter from Emily's parents arrived on a Thursday, delivered on a process server who made Marcus sign for it. Legal letterhead, 3 pages of whereas, and therefore a petition for emergency custody modification based on changed circumstances. Marcus read it twice, hands shaking, while Lily watched cartoons in the next room. They had evidence, the letter said, evidence of financial instability, evidence that Marcus could not provide adequate housing or educational opportunities, evidence that the child would be better served in a home with resources. They had been building their case quietly for months, documenting every time Marcus was late picking Lily up from school because the subway was delayed, every time her lunch was packed with store-brand items instead of organic, every time her clothes came from thrift stores instead of department stores. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. Marcus had that long to prove he was a fit parent, to demonstrate that love was more important than money, to convince a judge that a cramped apartment at Queens was better than a spacious house in Westchester. He called the free legal aid number 3 times before someone finally picked up. They were overworked and underfunded, handling hundreds of cases with staff built for dozens. The lawyer who finally took his case was young, competent, but honest about their chances. Your in-laws have resources. They can afford experts, character witnesses, documentation. We are going to do our best, but I need you to understand the odds. Marcus understood. He had always understood. But he had hoped that being a good father would be enough. That night, after Lily fell asleep, he sat at their small kitchen table with a notebook and tried to calculate what he could not afford to lose. Wrote down every bill, every expense, every dollar that stood between his daughter and a courtroom decision that would tear his life apart. The numbers did not add up. They never had. He was drowning slowly, and Emily's parents were going to use that drowning as proof that he deserved to sink. He thought about the woman from the subway, the one who had given the scholarship he had rejected so angrily. Wondered if she had been right, if pride was a luxury he could not afford when his daughter's future was at stake. Then he thought about the look on her face when he had confronted her, the way she had treated his life like a problem to be solved instead of a reality to be respected. No, he had been right to refuse. Accepting her money would have meant accepting her power over him, and he had given up too much already to surrender what little agency remained. He would find another way. He had to. The next morning, Marcus picked up extra shifts at the building, worked through his lunch breaks, stayed late, fixing things that could have waited. His supervisor noticed, but said nothing, just gave him more tasks and marked the overtime. The money helped, but not enough. Marcus looked into second jobs, third jobs, anything that would fit around Lily's schedule and his current hours. found nothing that paid enough to matter, and still let him be present for his daughter. He was trapped in the mathematics of poverty, where every solution created new problems, where working more meant seeing Lily less, which meant giving Emily's parents more ammunition for their case. 2 weeks before the hearing, Marcus broke down. Not in front of Lily, never where she could see, but alone in the bathroom after she fell asleep, sitting on the floor with his back against the tub. He let himself feel the weight of it all, the grief that never fully left, the exhaustion that had become his permanent state, the fear that he was going to lose the only person who mattered. He cried silently, face buried in his hands, shoulders shaking with sobs he had held back for months. And when he was empty, when he had nothing left, he stood up and washed his face and went back to the kitchen table where the bills were waiting. Because that was what you did. You kept going. You faced impossible situations with insufficient resources, and you found a way, or you did not, but you kept trying until you could not anymore. Emily would have known what to do. Emily would have fought with a fierceness that made obstacles disappear. But Emily was gone and Marcus was alone. The community center became his refuge. Twice a week he could forget about court hearings and legal bill and in-laws who wanted to prove him unfit. He could read stories to children who did not judge him by his bank account. He could watch Lily's face light up when other kids laughed at the voices he made. He could be good at something that mattered. It was there 3 weeks after their confrontation that Marcus met someone who would change everything, though neither of them knew it yet. Her name was Jennifer Chen, and she ran a nonprofit that worked with single parents navigating the family court system. She had come to the community center to post flyers about free legal workshops, had stayed to watch the reading session, had noticed Marcus's interaction with the children. Afterward, while Lily was helping clean up, Jennifer approached him. "You are good with them." Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with compliments. "Just reading books, it is more than that. You make them feel safe. That is a gift." They talked for 10 minutes, casual conversation that felt like the first normal interaction Marcus had experienced in weeks. Jennifer mentioned her organization, mentioned that they help parents like him, parents who were doing their best against systems designed to favor wealth over love. Marcus hesitated. Then, because he was desperate and had nothing left to lose, he told her about the custody hearing. Jennifer listened without interrupting, without judgment, without the pity that made Marcus want to disappear. When he finished, she handed him a card. "Come to our office tomorrow. We work with lawyers who specialize in these cases. No charge." Marcus looked at the card, suspicion warring with hope. "Why would you help me?" "Because everyone deserves a chance to fight for their kids. And because I can see you are already a good father. The court just needs to see it too." That night, Marcus researched Jennifer's organization, found articles about cases they had won, families they had kept together, parents who had defied the odds, found testimonials from people who sounded like him, people who had thought they had no chance until someone gave them tools to fight back. He made an appointment for the next day. The office was small, crowded with files and donated furniture, but the lawyer who met with Marcus was sharp and experienced. She reviewed the custody petition, asked pointed questions about Emily's parents, about their relationship with Lily, about their actual motivations versus their stated concerns. "This is not about Lily's welfare," she said after an hour. "This is about control. They are trying to buy their way to custody because they could not buy their way into your marriage." "Can we win?" The lawyer was quiet for a moment. "It will be hard. They have resources we do not. But I have seen worse odds, and you have something they do not. What you are, her father. You have been there every day since her mother died. You have sacrificed everything to keep her safe and loved. That counts for something." Marcus wanted to believe her, but he had learned that the world did not always reward the right things. Over the next 2 weeks, they built his case, documented every school event he had attended, every parent-teacher conference, every doctor's appointment, found teachers willing to testify that Lily was thriving, that she was happy and well-adjusted despite the tragedy she had endured. Gathered evidence that Marcus's modest circumstances did not equal neglect. It was exhausting work on top of his job and his volunteering and the simple act of being present for his daughter. Marcus slept 4 hours a night, survived on coffee and determination, felt himself fraying at the edges. But he kept going, because the alternative was unthinkable. While Marcus prepared for court, Victoria was preparing something else. She had been thinking about their confrontation for weeks, replaying his words, examining her own motivations, with a clarity that felt like surgery. He had been right. She had tried to control his life because she did not know another way to help. Because her entire existence was built on the belief that having power meant using it, that seeing problems meant fixing them, that resources were meant to be deployed like weapons against whatever needed changing. But Marcus had not needed changing. Marcus had needed respect. Victoria started writing on a Tuesday evening, sitting at her desk long after everyone else had gone home. Not an email, not a memo, but an actual letter pen on paper, words formed slowly because she had forgotten how to communicate without the buffer of screens and assistants. She wrote about her father, about the factory worker who had believed in helping because it was right. She wrote about how she had lost that belief somewhere in the climb from poverty to power, how she had stopped seeing people and started seeing problems to be solved. She wrote about the subway, about how a stranger's kindness had reminded her of something she had forgotten, about how his anger had taught her something business school never could, that dignity was not negotiable, that charity without respect was just another form of violence. The letter took 3 hours to write. When she finished, she sat back and read it through, crossing out words and adding others, refining, until it said what she meant without embellishment or excuse. Then she made an offer. Not charity, not a gift, but a job. Her company was launching a new initiative, a community outreach program designed to identify and support working families in underserved neighborhoods. They needed someone to run it, someone who understood what those families actually needed, not what executives in corner offices assumed they needed. The salary was fair. The hours were flexible enough for a single parent. The position reported to the head of community relations, not to Victoria directly, which meant Marcus would have autonomy and authority without being beholden to her. She was not trying to save him. She was trying to give him a chance to help others. The letter ended with a single line. "This is not about what you can do for me. It is about what we might do together if you are willing." Victoria addressed the envelope by hand, added proper postage, and dropped it in the mail slot herself instead of giving it to her assistant. Then she went home and waited, knowing he might not respond, knowing she had probably already destroyed whatever slim chance existed that he would trust her again. 3 weeks passed. Victoria heard nothing. She threw herself into the changes she was making at her company, the policies and programs that were shifting their culture in ways the board still did not fully understand or approve. She visited the community centers her foundation funded, actually visited, instead of just reviewing reports. Met families, learned names, listened to stories that broke through her professional detachment and reminded her why any of this mattered. She was learning to see people instead of problems. It was harder than any acquisition she had ever negotiated. Then on a Thursday morning, 4 weeks after she mailed the letter, her assistant knocked on her office door with an expression Victoria had never seen before. "There is someone here to see you. He does not have an appointment." Victoria's heart jumped, though she kept her voice neutral. "Who?" "He said his name is Marcus Cole." Victoria stood, smoothed her jacket, took a breath that did not quite steady her. "Send him in." Marcus walked through her office door, looking exactly the same as he had at the community center. Tired eyes and rough hands, and that quiet dignity she had nearly destroyed with her arrogance. He stood in the center of her office, looking around at the view and the furniture and the trappings of wealth, and Victoria saw him taking it all in, measuring the distance between their worlds. "I read your letter," he said. "Twice." Victoria gestured to the chair across from her desk. He sat, but not comfortably perched on the edge, like he was ready to leave. And I think you are not the person I thought you were." He paused. "Or maybe you are, and you are trying to become someone else. Is that a problem? I do not know yet." Marcus studied her face, and Victoria forced herself not to look away, to let him see whatever he needed to see. "My daughter asked me why I was so angry after we last spoke. I told her it was because someone had tried to help without asking first. She said maybe they just did not know how to ask." Victoria felt something ease in her chest, something that had been tight since their confrontation. "Your daughter sounds wan. She is 7, but she pays attention." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "I have some conditions. Name them. I will not be a token. I will not sit in meetings and smile while executives pretend to care about poor people. If I take this job, I do it my way. On the ground with real families, making real decisions." "Agreed. And I do not report to you. Not directly. I need to be able to tell you when you are wrong without worrying about my paycheck. Victoria considered this. It went against every instinct she had, every lesson she had learned about maintaining control. But that was precisely the point. Agreed. You will report to the head of community relations. I will have no direct authority over your position. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Victoria could see him weighing the offer against his pride, against the risk of accepting anything from her. Why are you doing this? Really, Victoria thought about the question, about all the answers she could give that would sound good, but would not be true. Because some people carry more than they show, she said finally, and I have been carrying something for a long time. I think it is time to set it down. What were you carrying? The weight of being powerful. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but it was heavy. I could not put it down because I thought it was holding me up. Now I think I was wrong. It was not holding me up. It was holding me back. Marcus studied her, and Victoria let him look for the lie she was not telling. Then slowly he nodded. Okay, I am in. They shook hands across her desk, not as savior, and saved not as powerful and powerless, but as two people who had recognized something true in each other and decided to see where that recognition might lead. When Marcus left, Victoria sat alone in her office and realized she was smiling. Not the professional smile she wore for meetings and photographs, but something real and unguarded. She had not saved him. He had not forgiven her. But they had found a way forward that honored both their needs, and that felt like more than she had dared to hope. Outside her window, the city continued its relentless motion. And somewhere in that machinery of millions, things were shifting in ways neither of them could predict, in ways that would test everything they thought they knew about power and kindness, and what it meant to help without controlling. The real work was just beginning. Marcus started on a Monday, arriving at the corporate headquarters an hour early because he had miscalculated subway timing and refused to be late on his first day. The building lobby was marble and glass, security guards and crisp uniforms, turnstiles that required badge access he did not have yet. He stood to the side, feeling conspicuous in his one good blazer, the one he had bought for Emily's funeral and had not worn since. A woman from HR rescued him, appeared with a temporary badge and a smile that was professional without being warm. She led him through corridors that smelled like expensive carpet and fresh paint, past conference rooms with names like Innovation and Synergy, up elevators that moved so smoothly he barely felt the motion. His office was on the 14th floor, small but private, with a window that overlooked a courtyard where young professionals ate lunch at metal tables. The furniture was new, the computer still in its packaging, and on the desk sat a welcome packet thick enough to be a novel. Marcus spent the first hour reading policies and signing forms, entering passwords, and configuring systems. The HR woman returned with an employee handbook and information about benefits he could not quite believe were real. Health insurance with no deductible, vision and dental included, 4 weeks of paid time off, retirement matching at 6%. He had been surviving on minimum benefits for so long that generosity felt like a trap. His supervisor arrived at 10, a woman named Patricia Hayes, who ran the community relations department, with the efficiency of someone who had climbed corporate ladders and knew which rungs were sturdy. She was 50, sharp-eyed, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. Welcome aboard. Victoria speaks highly of you. Marcus said nothing, unsure how to respond to that. Patricia seemed to understand his discomfort. You will report to me, not to her. I want that clear from the start. This is my department, and you are my hire regardless of how the introduction happened. You do good work, we will get along fine. You coast on connections, we will have problems. Fair enough. Good. Now let me show you what you are walking into. She led him to a conference room where 3 other staff members were waiting, people who ran existing community programs with varying degrees of success. They spent 2 hours walking Marcus through current initiatives, showing him spreadsheets and impact reports and photographs of ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Marcus listened, asked questions, and felt his skepticism growing. The programs looked good on paper, hit all the right metrics for annual reports and shareholder presentations. But they felt hollow, designed more for publicity than impact, more concerned with optics than outcomes. When the presentation ended, Patricia dismissed the others and turned to Marcus. What do you think, honestly, always? I think you are spending a lot of money to make yourselves feel good while not actually solving anything. Patricia's expression did not change. Elaborate. You have a job training program that teaches people skills for positions that do not exist in their neighborhoods. You have a financial literacy workshop that assumes people do not know how to budget, when the real problem is they do not have enough money to budget. You have after-school programs in buildings that close at 5 when most working parents do not get home until 6. He paused, waiting for her to get defensive. She did not. You are not wrong. These programs were designed by people who have never been poor, never been desperate, never had to choose between electricity and groceries. They see poverty as an education problem instead of a systems problem. Then why do them? Because something is better than nothing, and because changing systems takes longer than shareholders have patience for. Marcus met her eyes. I am not interested in doing things that look good but accomplish nothing. Good. Then you and I are going to get along fine. Your job is to tell me what would actually work, and my job is to fight for the budget to make it happen. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus learned the language of corporate philanthropy, stakeholder engagement, and impact metrics in theory of change frameworks. He hated most of it, found the jargon suffocating a way for wealthy people to discuss poverty without ever really touching it. But he also saw what resources could do when applied correctly. Saw families get housing assistance that kept them off the streets. Saw children access tutoring programs that changed their trajectories. Saw single mothers find jobs that paid enough to actually live on, not just survive. The work was messy and complicated and often frustrating, but it was real. And Marcus began to trust that this was not just performance, not just Victoria Ashford's company performing compassion for public relations. He still did not fully trust Victoria herself. She was too polished, too controlled, her words measured like she was always 3 moves ahead in a chess game he could not see. But she kept her promise, stayed out of his work. Let Patricia run the department without interference. Twice in his first month, Victoria stopped by his office. Both times she asked questions about the families he was working with, not their statistics but their stories. She listened without interrupting, without offering solutions, and when she left, Marcus felt like she had actually heard him. It was unsettling. He had expected her to revert to the person who had tried to buy his cooperation with anonymous scholarships. But she seemed genuinely trying to learn to understand, to become someone different than who she had been. Marcus did not know if people could really change that fundamentally, but he was willing to watch and see. The custody hearing loomed 6 weeks away, then 4, then 2. Marcus met with his lawyer twice a week, refining their strategy, preparing for the questions Emily's parents would raise. Jennifer's organization had been invaluable, connecting him with experts who would testify that children thrived on love more than luxury. That stability came from consistent presence, not expensive possessions. But Marcus knew the odds. Family courts favored grandparents with resources, especially when those grandparents could demonstrate concern for a child's welfare, backed by bank accounts and stable homes. He told no one at work about the hearing. It felt like admitting weakness, like giving people ammunition to doubt his competence. If he could not even keep custody of his own daughter, how could he be trusted to help other struggling families? The irony was not lost on him. One evening, working late to finish a report about food insecurity in the Bronx, Marcus heard a knock on his door. He looked up to find Victoria standing there, still in her work clothes, though it was past 8. "Do you have a minute?" He gestured to the chair across from his desk. The same configuration as their first real conversation, but with the power dynamic shifted. This was his office now, his space, and she was the visitor. "I wanted to ask how things are going. Not the work Patricia gives me updates. I mean you, how are you managing?" Marcus considered deflecting, giving her the professional answer that would end the conversation quickly. But something in her face stopped him, a vulnerability he had not seen before. "Honestly, I am terrified." Of what? He had not meant to say, it had not meant to open that door. But the words came anyway, exhaustion lowering defenses he usually kept solid. "I have a custody hearing in 2 weeks. My in-laws are trying to take Lily away. They think I cannot provide for her properly and legally. They might be right." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "What do you need?" "Nothing. I have a good lawyer, good people helping me. I just need to get through it." He expected her to offer help anyway, to push past his boundaries with resources and connections. But she surprised him. Would it help to talk about it? And so he did. For 40 minutes, Marcus told her about Emily's parents, about their disapproval of his marriage, about how their grief had curdled into something possessive, about the petition they had filed, the evidence they had gathered, the case they were building, that poverty equaled neglect. Victoria listened without interrupting, without offering solutions, without trying to fix anything. When he finished, she spoke carefully. I know lawyers. Good ones who specialize in family law. I can make an introduction if you want. No strings, no obligations. Just a connection to someone who might help. Marcus wanted to refuse on principle, wanted to maintain the independence he had fought so hard to preserve. But he thought about Lily, about what was at stake, about whether his pride was worth the risk. Just an introduction. Just an introduction. What you do with it is entirely your decision. He nodded slowly. Okay. Thank you. Victoria stood to leave, paused at the door. For what it is worth, I think you are exactly the kind of father Lily needs. The court should see that too. When she left, Marcus sat in the silence of his office and felt something shift. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. Victoria had offered help without controlling the outcome, had respected his agency while still providing support. Maybe people really could change. The introduction happened 2 days later. A phone call with a lawyer named Sarah Mendez, who had built her career on defending parents who could not afford to lose. She reviewed Marcus's case file, asked sharp questions, then delivered her assessment. Your current lawyer is good, but she is overworked. Let me assist. No charge. I do pro bono work for situations like this. Why? Because I grew up with a single father who everyone said could not raise me properly. He proved them wrong. I like helping people do the same. Sarah joined his legal team, bringing resources and experience that immediately changed the shape of their defense. She knew the judge assigned to the case, knew what arguments would resonate, knew how to frame Marcus's choices as strengths instead of weaknesses. With her help, they built a case that was not about money, but about love, not about material advantages, but about the irreplaceable bond between a father and daughter who had survived tragedy together. The hearing date arrived faster than Marcus wanted and slower than he could stand. He took the day off work, dressed in his funeral blazer, and met his lawyers at the courthouse at 8 in the morning. Emily's parents were already there, sitting on a bench outside the courtroom with their attorney, a man in an expensive suit who looked like he billed by the minute. Emily's mother would not meet Marcus's eyes. Her father stared at him with undisguised contempt. Inside the courtroom, Marcus sat at the defendant's table and tried to keep his breathing steady. Lily was not here, would not be subjected to this, was safe at school, unaware that her entire future was being decided by strangers in robes. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Emily's parents presented their case with clinical precision, documenting every perceived failure, every missed opportunity, every sign that Marcus could not provide the life their granddaughter deserved. They brought photographs of their home, a sprawling property in Westchester, with a pool and a playroom and a bedroom already decorated for Lily. They brought expert testimony about the importance of educational opportunities in stable environments. They made Marcus's love sound like a liability. Then Sarah took over, methodical and fierce. She called Lily's teacher, who testified that the child was thriving academically and emotionally, that her father attended every conference and school event despite his work schedule. She called the director of the community center, who spoke about Marcus's volunteer work, his dedication to children, the way Lily watched him with absolute trust. She called Jennifer Chen, who explained how her organization evaluated parental fitness, how Marcus scored exceptional on every measure that mattered: love, presence, sacrifice, commitment. And finally, Sarah put Marcus on the stand. The questions were hard, designed to expose every vulnerability. Why had he lost his job? Why had he accepted a demotion? Why was he living in a one-bedroom apartment when his daughter deserved her own space? Why could he not provide the advantages that grandparents who loved her could offer? Marcus answered each one honestly, without embellishment or excuse. Yes, he had lost his career. Yes, they lived modestly. Yes, Emily's parents could give Lily material things he could not. But he was her father. He had been there every morning and every night since her mother died. He had learned to braid hair and pack nutritious lunches and talk about feelings even when it was uncomfortable. He had sacrificed his career because his daughter needed him more than he needed advancement. Money could buy many things, but it could not buy the bond they had built in 3 years of grief and survival and fierce love. When he stepped down from the stand, Marcus had no idea whether he had done enough. The judge's face revealed nothing. The courtroom cleared while the judge deliberated. Marcus sat on the same bench where Emily's parents had waited, staring at marble floors that had absorbed countless family dramas. Sarah sat beside him. You did well. Will it be enough? I do not know. But you gave the judge everything she needs to make the right decision. An hour passed, then two. Finally, the bailiff called them back inside. The judge looked at Marcus, then at Emily's parents, then down at the papers in front of her. This court recognizes that the petitioners love their granddaughter and want what is best for her. Their concerns about financial stability are not without merit. However, this court also recognizes that the bond between parent and child cannot be measured in bank accounts or square footage. Marcus's heart hammered so hard he could barely hear the next words. Mr. Cole has demonstrated consistent, devoted parenting under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. He has prioritized his daughter's emotional needs even at great personal cost. There is no evidence of neglect or harm, only evidence of a father doing his best with limited resources. The judge looked directly at Marcus. Petition denied. Custody remains with the father. However, I am ordering regular visitation for the grandparents, supervised initially to ensure that Lily maintains a relationship with her mother's family. The gavel fell. Marcus's knees went weak. Sarah gripped his arm, steadying him. You won. Emily's mother was crying. Her father looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. Their lawyer was already gathering papers, preparing for the appeal Marcus knew would come eventually. But for now, today, Lily was still his. Marcus walked out of the courthouse into afternoon sunlight that felt impossibly bright. He called the school, confirmed that Lily's pickup routine had not changed, that he would be there at 3 like always. Then he sat on the courthouse steps and let himself feel it. Relief and grief and love, so fierce it felt like it might break him open. His phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. Heard the news through your lawyer. Congratulations. Take the rest of the week. And below it, a message from Victoria. I am glad justice saw what I saw. Your daughter is lucky to have you. Marcus stared at the messages, at these women who barely knew him, but had somehow become part of the network keeping him afloat. He had been so determined to do everything alone, to prove he did not need help, to maintain his independence at all costs. But maybe independence was not the same as isolation. Maybe accepting help did not mean surrendering control, not when the help came with respect and boundaries and the freedom to choose. He stood up, pocketed his phone, and headed back to Queens to pick up his daughter. To tell her that they were staying together, that no one could take her away, that love had been enough after all. That evening, Lily safe in bed after celebrations involving ice cream and her favorite movie, Marcus sat at his kitchen table and thought about the future. Not the desperate calculations of survival he had been making for 3 years, but actual plans, possibilities. The job Victoria had offered was more than a paycheck. It was a chance to help families like his, to use everything he had learned from struggle and loss and fighting impossible odds, to turn his pain into purpose. He thought about the initiative Patricia had mentioned last week, the ambitious expansion that needed someone to lead it, someone who understood communities from the inside, who knew what struggling families actually needed, instead of what wealthy donors assumed they needed. Marcus had dismissed it, initially assumed he was not qualified, not credentialed enough, not corporate enough for that kind of responsibility. But sitting in his modest kitchen, in his modest apartment, with his daughter sleeping in the next room, Marcus realized something. He was exactly qualified. Not despite his struggles, but because of them. The next morning, he walked into Patricia's office and told her he wanted the job. Wanted to build something real. Something that would help people the way he wished someone had helped him after Emily died. Patricia smiled like she had been waiting for this. Good. Because Victoria has been asking me when you would be ready. She believes in you, even if you do not believe in yourself yet. That afternoon, Marcus met with Victoria in her office for the first time since their initial conversation. She outlined the vision for the program, a network of community centers across the city offering childcare and job training and family support services. The budget was substantial, the timeline aggressive. This is ambitious, Marcus said, flipping through the proposal, maybe too ambitious. He watched her carefully, waiting for defensiveness. You are probably right. That is why I need you to build it properly instead of quickly. Take the time to do it right, to get community input, to create something that actually serves, instead of just looking impressive in annual reports. Marcus studied her face, looking for the calculation, the hidden agenda. Found nothing but sincerity and something that looked like hope. I have conditions. I expected you would. I build this program the way I think it should be built, from the ground up. Not what looks good on paper, but what actually works for real families. Agreed. And I need Patricia as my direct supervisor. You stay involved, but you do not control daily decisions. Victoria nodded without hesitation. Agreed. Anything else? Marcus thought about it. I want to succeed or fail on my own terms. If this does not work, it is on me. But if it does work, the credit goes to the communities we serve, not to your company's PR department. Victoria leaned back in her chair, and for the first time since he met her, Marcus saw her smile. Really smile, unguarded and genuine. You are going to be good at this. Better than good. You are going to build something that matters. They shook hands across her desk, and Marcus felt the weight of new responsibility settle onto shoulders that had carried so much already. But this weight felt different, purposeful, like he was finally building instead of just surviving. Walking out of her office, Marcus thought about Emily, about what she would say if she could see him now. She would be proud, he thought. Not of the job or the salary or the opportunity, but of the fact that he had not let grief destroy him, had not let loss make him bitter. He had kept going, kept trying, kept being the person she believed he was. And maybe, just maybe, he was becoming someone even better.